Okay, guys, so we have been learning about EQ. And as we can see, there's a lot to learn about EQ, right? We've been talking about what the different types of EQ are. We talked about different frequency ranges. We've talked about applying EQ to things like vocals. We've talked about EQing our low end and kind of getting some clarity there. And today, I want to talk to you about dynamic EQ.
Ed McCrae Music.
Hi, how are you doing? I'm richly blessed. I pray that you are as well. All right, so dynamic EQ. Dynamic EQ is where we have EQ that only gets applied when a signal goes over a certain threshold. That sounds kind of familiar, right? What does that sound like, boys and girls? That sounds like compression, right? And you are exactly right if that's what you guessed, right? A dynamic EQ is an EQ that functions like an EQ, but it uses elements of compression. Now, dynamic EQ is very similar to a multi-band compressor. They literally do the same thing, but the difference is in the way that they do them, right? So dynamic EQ is an EQ that functions like a compressor. A multi-band compressor is a compressor that has elements of EQ, right? So with a dynamic EQ, we are going to be able to set a threshold, and when the signal goes over that threshold, that EQ is going to be applied based on how much gain we've told it to use to reduce it, right? So we're gonna pull down our gain and say, all right, once it hits over this amount, I want you to bring it down. Now, some dynamic EQs will have attack and release that we can configure as well. The Pro Q4, which is what I'll be using to demonstrate here in a few moments, does have that. Others may not have that, right? So with a dynamic EQ, again, we're using gain. If we were using a multi-band compressor, and I'm going to show you an example of that in a moment as well, we would be compressing using ratio. So similar thing, we'd say, all right, we'll set the threshold. I only want this to kick in when it is above this threshold. And then based on the ratio that we set, that is going to determine how much it's going to push that down. So most commonly, we would use dynamic EQ or multi-band compression when we have trouble areas that we want to catch. It's not something where I want it to always be applied, but there's certain areas, right, where maybe a frequency is sticking its head out just at certain points, and I want to use that dynamic EQ to push it back down, right? So we know that one great example of that is sibilance. And I'm going to talk more about that in the demonstration in a moment. So things like sibilance, or even, we talked about low end in our last video. There's certain things that at certain parts in the song, there's some mud that's happening where multiple instruments are happening or functioning at the same time, but we don't want to kill a certain frequency for the whole mix, but just at certain moments, if it's over a level, we want it to push that particular signal down. Dynamic EQ is great for that. So I'm going to demonstrate that stuff for you. Before I do, please take a moment and like and subscribe to this channel. Well, like this video and subscribe to this channel, and also share. Don't be stingy. Don't be stingy, right? We got good stuff going on over here at the Ed McCrae Music channel, and there's going to be much more things to come. You want to share that with somebody else. We're all learning together, and I love being able to share with you guys. All right, so without further ado, let's take a look at an example of dynamic EQ. Okay, so typically the way I mostly use dynamic EQ in a mix is on vocals to deal with sibilance. Now, ironically, in this particular mix, I'm using a multi-band compressor to do it, and it's probably just because that's just what I felt like using. I can't really think of any other reason that I'd be using a multi-band compressor here for that, other than that's just what I decided to do. But typically, and when we talk about sibilance, of course, we're talking about that harshness in the top of our vocal that comes from S's and T's, right? All that kind of thing. So typically what I do is I have a de-esser working at the very beginning of the vocal chain. I tend to like to use this guy right here, and that's going to catch some things initially. But then, as we go along, we're EQing stuff, and we're probably going to boost the top end, right? So here, I've got the top end, got a boost here to add some brightness and some shine and things like that. And then I'm compressing, right? So we're boosting volume here. I have my second compressor for color here, and I'm boosting more there. So typically after that, somewhere after that, I will typically have either a multiband compressor or dynamic EQ to deal with the residual sibilance, right? And so that's what's happening here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disable that. And I've got down here, I've got just some other stuff happening. I added more brightness. And then here I'm dealing with some resonance using the Pro Q4. So let's just disable this and let's just add in just a fresh instance of the Pro Q4 just so I can show you how we would engage a dynamic EQ. All right, so the first thing I could do, and first of all, every EQ is not going to have this feature, all right? Certain EQs will, certain EQ plugins will not. So you would need to look and see if the EQ plugin that you use supports this, and if it does not, you might want to find one that does, all right? So here, right, I can come in and I already know that my sibilance is going to be up here. So I'm going to shorten that a little bit. Usually somewhere anywhere after 4K, right? So I'm going to get sibilance in here and we'll listen for it. So I'm just going to put my curve right here for right now. And let's pull this down. Now, again, different plugins will behave differently in Pro Q4. All I have to do is hold control click, hold control and left click, and I can say make dynamic. Okay, boom. So now this is a dynamic EQ. So I'm pulling it down a little bit to begin with, but then here, this is the dynamic portion of things. Now, when I take a look at my controls here, for my dynamic EQ, of course, I have my threshold. In the Pro Q4, it will set to automatic at first, but we can change that. And then in here, I can also deal with attack and I can deal with release, okay? Now, the thing that it is not giving me in here, which I would get in a multi-band compressor, is things such as ratio, where I'm controlling how much is being compressed, right? Remember, with a dynamic EQ, it is an EQ that has some elements of compression, right? So we are going to be using gain to adjust volume as opposed to using ratio, which is what a compressor would do, right? So let's see kind of what this is doing, because ultimately I want to adjust this so it's only reacting when my S's and T's, when my sibilance comes in. So let's just see what's happening. I see you in the garden. I hear you wrestling. All right, so first of all, I'm going to move it over here because it looks like here my sibilance is happening more up here, all right? So it could be anywhere after 4K. So it's happening more up here. Let's take a listen again. I see you in the garden. I hear you wrestling. So it's kind of working, right? But it's grabbing other stuff too. So I'm going to pull this down a little bit and I'm going to adjust my threshold here. Instead of using an automatic threshold, I'm going to try to adjust this so it's only catching the S's and T's. And let's adjust our Q. Somehow our Q got kind of wide there. So I want to try to have this only catching that sibilance. Let's see what we could do. I see you in the garden. I hear you wrestling. Saying, Father, I don't want to do this. That is pretty darn good. Now, I could play around with it a little bit, right? Of course, in the Pro Q4, I can adjust the attack and release, right? If I wanted to play around with that, I could do so. But here, it is only attenuating when the signal is going over the threshold. Let's play it one more time. I see you in the garden. I hear you wrestling, saying, Father, I don't want to do this. Right? And again, I can play around with that more and really dial it in exactly how I want it. But this is most commonly how I would use dynamic EQ, right? To get rid of sibilance. I don't want it to carve out all the time, but when it comes over a certain point, over that threshold, I want it to go ahead and knock that down. And then again, with the dynamic EQ, remember we are using gain to control how much it's pushing it down, as opposed to ratio like we would do with a multi-band compressor. All right. Now, here's another place where I am, again, for some reason, I was just in multi-band mode, I guess, in this particular mix. But if we look over here, I'm actually using it with my double vocals here. If I'm using it with my background vocals, so I was just in multi-band. I think I just hadn't used a multi-band compressor in a while, so I just felt like giving it some love, right? Give the drummer some love, give the drummer some, right? So here I'm using this in the bass, and I'm using a multi-band compressor, but we could do this with an EQ as well. Let's go to a place where the bass comes in. And just to show you what it is doing, just to talk about another time where we would use this. Let's see what's happening here. Travel down the road to nowhere. So there are certain things you can hear. Boom, bop, boom. When I was playing it, it kind of was sticking out a little bit. So I just have some compression. Again, I could do the same thing with the dynamic EQ happening here, so that when it hits those certain frequencies, it is coming down. And it probably, looking at the other instrumentation that I have here, it probably, that low mid was probably messing around a little bit with one of these pads I have here, or probably this Rhodes. It was probably doing something with that Rhodes there, where just that frequency was sticking out. And so I'm just using this to just knock it down a little bit. Travel down the road to nowhere. See, it's only coming in a boom, bop, boom. It's only coming in on those certain points, right? So that is what we would use dynamic EQ or a multi-band compressor to do. And again, as I explained in our intro, the difference between the two, they are very, very similar. The difference is really how it's doing the thing. It's doing the same thing, but how it's doing the thing is different. A dynamic EQ is an EQ that has elements of compression, right? Threshold, attack, maybe, ratio, maybe. A multiband compressor is a compressor that has elements of EQ, where we're using or applying it only to specific frequency ranges, but it is working like a compressor with ratio. And I keep saying compressor, I don't know why, with ratio and attack and release and all that kind of stuff, right? So we're really using dynamic EQ to just deal with specific little trouble areas or things that pop out that we want to pull down or possibly even expand at certain points. Okay, guys, I hope that was helpful to you. Again, use that dynamic EQ to deal with those trouble areas. Again, also remember, if you're looking at your EQ plugin, you're like, well, Ed, I don't see anything about dynamics here. It might be that that particular plugin does not have a dynamics section, right? So you want to find a plugin that does, or you might want to decide to use like a multi-band. Maybe you don't have an EQ that does it, but maybe you do have a multi-band compressor. Go ahead and throw that on there. It's gonna do the same stuff. All right, please take a moment and again, like this video, subscribe to this channel, and go into the comment section. Leave comments, guys. I always love going back and forth with you guys. Those of you who have left comments, you know that I do reply. Not to everything, but I try to like everything, and I do reply if you ask a question or what have you. So please definitely do that. It also helps to encourage me. Many of you have left great comments about how this channel is really helping you and how you wish you had this information, when you first started. And so that's what I'm here for. So that really makes my day. So please make sure that you do that. And I'm gonna see you guys soon in another video. I think we're gonna talk about mid-side EQ next. I think that's what we're gonna do, but we'll see. Whatever's next, you're subscribed to the channel, so you'll see it, and I'll see you then. All right, peace.